You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Keith Schaefer, editor and publisher of the Oil and Gas Investments Bulletin. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Jim, always a pleasure.
What is the fallout from the federal election?
Well, for energy, I think people forget that we actually never had that much success under the Harper government in solving our big problems, which is why is Canadian oil the cheapest in the world? And really that's because we have no pipelines to anywhere but the U.S. Gulf Coast. Like, it's absolutely insane that there's no pipeline to the west coast of Canada from Fort McMurray, which is only 1,400 miles away. And the most likely way we're going to get oil to Tidewater is actually through a ridiculously circular route around through the prairies. Part of it all of it has to go through Michigan, some through Chicago to get back up into Sarnia, out to Montreal to get to Tidewater. Like, that is just crazy. So we never did solve that problem. And I think we have two big issues here that potentially Mr. Trudeau might be able to solve for us. One is that Mr. Harper, our former Prime Minister, and President Obama did not like each other, were at best civil to each other, but basically hated each other's guts. And there was no way, as long as Harper was PM, that you were going to see any pipeline like Keystone XL get approved here. So Trudeau, a little bit softer, may be willing to, a better relationship with the White House should help Canadian energy. And then the other part really was that under Mr. Harper, no pipelines got built and all these discounts were done. What's the word I'm looking for? The social license for the energy sector really was never really got off the ground here under Mr. Harper's leadership. Now, the industry itself has to answer for a lot of that, Jim, but certainly the federal government, in my mind, did absolutely nothing to help the social license. The industry and the government together were basically Luddites dragging their knuckles on the ground as this issue moved forward, and they were always behind the eight ball trying to catch up. And you'd think that Mr. Trudeau's everything he said on the campaign trail about engaging the provinces more, engaging the First Nations more, would allow that social license to happen much more quickly now. So I'm actually pretty hopeful. The reality is that the Harper government did, in one sense, what they were supposed to, just have the basic rules of law, but in terms of really helping out the industry get ahead of the big issues of the day, we have to give them pretty close to an F for that. So that kind of gets lost. Everyone thinks that the government, conservative government, should have done, Canadian industry did great, but really not so much.
Do you expect Mr. Harper to end up on the board of directors of oil companies?
Probably a couple, but honestly, I don't see him being a big board person. He wasn't really part of the inside group anywhere. And it's not a big, the character that he showed in office, unlike the other conservative prime minister, Mr. Mulroney, 30 years ago, Mr. Mulroney made it very clear he was going to go be Mr. Corporate and make money, because Mr. Mulroney left the prime minister's office basically broke. I'm not convinced Mr. Harper's in that seat, but so we'll probably see him on a couple of boards, but nowhere near what we saw Mulroney or anybody else. Mr. Harper is just not an insider in the industry, in the corporate world, like Mulroney was.
Plus, Mulroney was much more social. I mean, I can't imagine Harper singing Irish Eyes or smiling with the President of the United States like Mulroney did.
Exactly.
The Bank of Canada is predicting a 20% drop in oil investments next year. What do you see?
That's it? Just 20%? Woohoo! We're lucky!
Well, it seems to me the Bank of Canada always... it seems to me the Bank of Canada always either overestimates or underestimates, and it is never on target.
The reality is, Jim, because the oil sands is such a big part of the energy complex here, and the capex in the oil sands generally runs 50 to 80 billion a year. So it can basically hold steady, and everything else in the patch can almost fall to zero, and you're not really looking at that big a drop. So I'm not sure where they've projected that 20% to come from. I would say, we're probably clearly down 20% this year over last year, and if oil prices don't improve, absolutely, you're going to see that happen again. It only makes sense that there's really no. In Canada, we're a little bit better off because of our lower dollar, but really, there's no real need for extra Canadian oil anywhere in the world right now.
Your appearance on BNN blamed Canada for the glut of oil. Is that really true?
Oh, absolutely. When you saw the U.S. oil inventories rise back in January, that was directly attributable to the new Enbridge pipeline taking Canadian oil down across the border and through Chicago and then down through its U.S. pipeline system. We were probably 33 to 40% of the build in U.S. oil inventories through January through June.
Who benefits the most from all the moves made in oil right now?
Well, really, the OPEC strategy is playing out perfectly. Like I say, I'm just not convinced the Saudis really expected oil to stay this low this long. But, basically they wanted to put some discipline into the U.S. energy sector, which was just running full steam ahead and losing buckets of money, and they just saw that as being rather crazy. And so, the price of oil had already dropped from $100 to $80 before November 27th last year when they said we were not going to balance the market, and which immediately took it to 40. But so the Saudis weren't really part of that, but they saw what was happening, and they said history was very clear for them. It's not up to us to save the world's oil price because everyone else just produce in our stead. It should be the low-cost producer. So I think their strategy has basically worked out exactly the way they had thought, just probably about 3 months later. So what's happening now, Jim, the latest round of negative energy stories that we're seeing, and these come in waves, is that, all the work that the U.S. shale guys have done to prolong production. So they're high grading their wells. They let all the rigs go on the core part of on the outside part of their properties. They're only drilling on the core. So now they've got the best rigs with the best crews drilling the best parts of the properties. All that has basically done all it can now. And so now what we're seeing is that there's quite a big anticipation that U.S. production decreases are going to speed up. So that would be very bullish for oil, actually. If we dropped another 500,000 barrels a day off the 500,000 we've already dropped down in the States. So, and certainly light oil in Canada is also dropping. Sadly, overall we're increasing just because of our oil sands exposure. But the U.S. oil production should be dropping off fairly quickly now, and that's exactly what the Saudis wanted to see.
Do wells that are drilled or exploited using fracking run out of oil faster?
Well, that's a good question. It's too early to say. We won't know that for 20, 30 years, but the reality is that they certainly drop off initially much faster. So, whereas at a conventional well that hit an old style pool might drop 50% in its first year, you're seeing the shale wells drop off more like 60 to 80%. So, but overall, Jim, the jury's still out on that. I think most energy analysts would agree that it probably does probably peter out a little sooner.
The giant Marcellus Natural Gas field in Pennsylvania, how's that holding up?
Well, it depends who you talk to. When you talk to my colleague Bill Powers, he's got a lot of very good data that show the amount of production coming out of the Marcellus declining, and yet all the pipeline flows out of the Marcellus are showing continued high rates, and even any new pipelines that come on stream are being filled immediately, despite the fact that Marcellus prices are the lowest in all of North America. So, you're often seeing gas prices there either under $1 the odd day or maybe $1.25 to $1.50, compared to $2. Like even Canada's got higher prices than that. So you've got that dichotomy where well results are saying kind of one thing, but pipeline flows are saying another. But right now the market's pretty convinced that the Marcellus will keep producing quite prolifically over the next, few years as a minimum.
We'll have more with Keith Schaefer right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Keith Schaefer. Keith, how important is the restructuring of debt become in the petroleum industry right now?
Well, this is kind of really, I think, where everybody started to get quite hopeful that we would see some discipline put into the producers by these lenders, and the lenders would say, hey, you got to either stop drilling, or you got to slow down, or you got to figure out how to pay. But really, for the last year, there's been almost no real discipline, and part of the reason for that, Jim, is that you've seen a lot of new lenders in the energy game. So a lot of private equity guys who really don't have the experience and background, and wrote a lot of cheap, easy debt with almost no covenants. So it wasn't like your traditional cycle where, as things started to go sour, these companies would be forced to sell assets. Of course, many of them have, but some of the big guys really haven't been forced to. And actually what we're seeing now that I think is just so funny is that the little guys are absolutely getting squeezed now for the first time. So after a year of low oil prices, their banks are really saying to them, look, you've got to start selling assets more aggressively, which puts these companies in a really tough spot. But the guys who owe the banks a lot of money, what we're finding is that they're actually in the driver's seat. They're going back to all their lenders and saying, yeah, so listen, we owe $2 billion, and that debt is now trading at like 30 cents on the dollar in the secondary market. So I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll pay you 40 cents on the dollar, so you're making like quite a big premium over what the debt's currently trading at, and then we're gonna translate that into new debt. So instead of the company owing $2 billion, they only owe maybe $1.2 billion, and the debt trades at 60 to 80 cents with a slightly higher coupon. So really, what they're doing is screwing the lenders, who deserve it. They didn't. When you put on that much debt and things go wrong, that's what happens. And so now these guys are basically taking the bankers down and saying, look, you got to reduce the amount of debt here and give us a better chance of getting out, or else we're going to declare bankruptcy and you're going to lose all your money. So that's what's happening, and it's that old story. You owe the bank $1 million, the bank owns you. You owe the bank $1 billion, you own the bank.
What's the outlook for natural gas heading into the cold season? I know across North America we've had an unusually warm October, but my experience is that usually ends with a blizzard somewhere.
Yeah, obviously, Jim, calling the weather is very tough, but right now, most of the main weather services are predicting quite a warm winter. There's this phenomenon called El Nino, where the Pacific waters are very warm compared to normal, and the biggest El Nino on record is 1997, 1998, and basically the meteorologists are calling for this to be the second largest after that. So it's very bearish for natural gas. I think there's an excellent chance that natural gas prices should be starting to rise here very shortly, but we're not really seeing any signs technically that we're going to get a lift in nat gas prices. They've dropped 15% in the last month and a half, and it would take. You got to remember that we've had basically 3 very cold winters in a row. 3 years ago was March, April that was really cold, and then each of the last 2 years had polar vortexes for a couple of months, usually in February, March, where it was like down to minus 40, 50 in Canada and minus 30 and minus 20 in the States for like 6 to 8 weeks. And that totally saved the natural gas price from really going down to about $1 as opposed to the $2.75, $2.60 that's been trading at through most of the year. So each of the last 2 winters, well, 2 winters ago we saw gas get up to $8, and you saw some localized pricing go into double digits. This past year when we had the polar vortex, the industry was way more prepared for that, and so gas prices only got up to about 4. And this winter, Jim, if we get this El Nino, you could see gas prices at $2, where it's actually lower instead of higher.
And that's where homeowners wish they had a natural gas storage system so they could stock up on the cheap gas.
That's right. We haven't figured that one out yet. But and honestly, retail gas prices should go lower than what they normally do when this type of thing happens. But anyway, so I'm still pretty bearish. Gas has actually done quite a bit better than I expected this year, staying flat in the 265 to 270 range. It's just dropped below that for the first time here in the last couple of weeks, which I would have thought it would have spent all summer at those lower levels. But honestly, it's traded better than I would have expected.
U.S. gasoline and distillate inventories are lower than they anticipated. Is that because of the nice weather? People are just driving more?
That's probably it. You're seeing, lower prices are just stimulating demand. And then, like you say, we had, in the north here in particular, we've had a warmer October than expected, so that should be bullish for gasoline use. But, right now, there's been the refineries are being shut down across the United States for maintenance. And so that's reducing gasoline supply. So gasoline should be going higher, and it's not. So it's actually quite bearish for gasoline prices right now, which would be pretty bearish for refineries.
Keith, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Jim, God bless. Talk in 2 weeks.
My guest has been Keith Schaefer, editor and publisher of the Oil and Gas Investments Bulletin, the website oilandgas-investments.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Check out our popular YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Comments or questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.